Hello, everybody. Welcome. Thank you for
Hello.
joining us for another webinar session. We're going to just let a few minutes pass or a few moments pass to allow people to sign in. This webinar is being live streamed through Facebook as well. So thank you, those of you joining us through Facebook. Today, we're doing a special demo session with the amazing Mike Thomson, award-winning artist known for sculpting some of our favorite collectibles. Mike's digital sculpting clients include Sideshow, Collectibles, Real Effects, and Nike. Today, Mike will show us how he creates his superhero collectibles using Zbrush, and he's working on his Cintiq Pro 32. This webinar is brought to you in part by our partners in Canada, Annex Pro, and our team in Wacom, Canada. Today's webinar guidelines are very simple. This webinar will be around an hour long. I will be asking Mike all the questions that you submit using the Q&A. Please don't use the chat for questions. I will be only asking questions submitted through the Q&A. If you're on Facebook and you want to also ask questions, we have a team member on Facebook sending us all your questions. So please, if you have any questions regarding Mike's process, the software he's using, or Wacom products, please send them our way. This webinar session will be recorded and available for later viewing on YouTube. And we're getting ready to go back to school. We have some great deals in Wacom Canada. Through September 4th, we have the Intro sale. Please check it out, up to $60 off. And through September 18th, starting in September 5th, we have the Intuos Pro sale, up to $130 off. All great tools. You can do Zbrush work with either Intuos or Intuos Pro as well. And for our Wacom Canada friends, please welcome our Wacom Canada community on Instagram. Go give them a follow and check out their feed for all the details and sales and artists in Wacom Canada. Thank you, Annex Pro again. I'm gonna stop sharing my screen and we are now live with Mike. Hey, Mike.
Hello.
How's
How are
it
you?
going?
I'm good. Good. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us. I know that you've prepared a very special demo for us today, and you've also prepared a nice deal for the viewers.
Correct. Yeah. Because I am a giant fan of Wacom, I've been using the products forever. And I think the last time that I was able to do anything with you guys was when we had the South American tour. That was amazing. So I thought, in honor of coming back and doing something, I'd give a discount code for my anti-venom full process videos, which kind of clocks in, I think, at right around 10 hours worth of content. And so there's a 50% off discount code that if you're watching this stream, either now or later on, you can use it to get half price for that deal.
Awesome. We just dropped the information in the chat. My colleague Tom, if you guys can see it, please check it out. Thank you so much, Mike, for preparing that nice deal for us. This is just sort of a teaser of what you can expect in that class, but obviously this is just a very general overlook.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So, Mike, we know you very well. Like you say, we went touring with you in Wacom Academy. We're very familiar with your career. Before we begin, would you mind give a short intro to those of you who are new to Mike's work?
Sure, absolutely. So I am a digital sculptor and illustrator. I actually have been illustrating for a really long time. Worked on projects for clients like Nike and a lot of clothing companies. Came up with some of the young men's brands like Echo, and did some stuff for Timberland and stuff like that. But I always was a fan of comic books and of hip hop music. And so my career path has kind of gone along those two trajectories. And it's just been, I've been very fortunate to work on things that I really enjoy doing. So like I said, I started as an illustrator. And that's part of the reason why I learned how to use ZBrush, because I had clients like Hasbro, and I was doing stuff for G.I. Joe characters. And I thought it'd be easier to model their gear and you know, all the helmets and stuff like that if I could actually have reference that I could turn around and light properly and things like that. So started learning ZBrush, and I actually was fortunate enough to work on some stuff for Civil War. So this Black Panther piece right here actually started as a test piece for Marvel, and I had a really, really super rough sculpt of this that I was able to light and use to figure out, you know, the landmarks and stuff like that, right? And then it kind of turned into this, and this is some of the, you know, some more Civil War work. And that led me to do, you know, more projects, right? So like this is a good example of that G.I. Joe work I was talking about. And I had the toy without any of the color on it, and I kind of used that to, you know, to come up with box art. So they use my art for the box, and this is the kind of stuff that I do for a living. So I got the bug, you know, I enjoyed sculpting so much that I wanted to really learn it. So in the past few years, I've really been kind of working on my anatomy and kind of leveling up my statue work. And like you mentioned earlier, now I do stuff for Sideshow and have done some pieces for Nike and things like that.
That's wonderful. Thank you for sharing that.
Thank you.
And so you've been using ZBrush since you started sculpting digitally.
Yes. Yeah.
Is
Yeah.
that the best tool? Is that what you recommend? We have a lot of aspiring young artists tuning in, possibly wanting to go into the digital sculpting. Is that the only great software? Is that the one you recommend? Why is it that every time I speak to a digital sculptor, is ZBrush always the choice?
Yeah, so it's interesting because like ZBrush is, there are other choices. You know, there's cheaper things, and there's actually a free software that you know, Blender, that kind of, it does sculpting as well. But the reason that ZBrush is kind of the industry standard is just because it it only does the sculpting, and it does it really, really well. And they keep coming up with these upgrades. So I'm such a fan that I started doing streaming for them. So twice a month, I actually do a 3-hour stream where I'm usually working on a project. And the thing I'm going to work on today actually began as a Pixelogic stream. So if anybody wants to see, you know, how it went from looking like a really, really crappy version of what it is now to where it is, you know, today, then you can go back and look at those videos. But yeah, I think, you know, ZBrush is kind of, it's the Wacom of the digital sculpting software, you know, like there are competitors, but it just, it's kind of the really good version that you want to get. So.
Yeah, no, we're not competitors. We complement each other so well.
No. I mean, like there's other tablets as well.
Yeah,
but,
for
you know,
sure.
yeah,
For
but
sure. But like when you say that the Wacom of sculpting software, yeah, it's sort of the industry standard.
right.
And you're right, every digital sculptor that I've interviewed has always, you know, stuck to ZBrush. And we are very good friends with Pixelogic. So
Mm-hmm.
shout
Yeah,
out to our
absolutely.
friends at Pixelogic. And if you are a student, that is software that Mike recommends you learning right away, because you're going to use it over and over again.
Definitely. Yep.
So we do have some
So,
students, besides learning ZBrush, I mean, what your background is in regular art school, or did you go to design school? What's your background in terms of your schooling?
so I actually attended University of Maryland in College Park, got a graphic design degree, which I still do some, you know, some graphic work, but not so much. And then just decided that I really enjoyed doing things like t-shirts. So got into the t-shirt industry, and started working with, like I mentioned earlier, some of the young men's brands, doing, you know, different designs. I was the creative director at Echo. So if anybody's familiar with, you know, any of the I don't know, like early 2000s Echo stuff. That was probably some of my stuff that you saw on the shirts and in the ads. Yeah, that's
Awesome. Was your transition from 2D to 3D like a smooth one?
yeah, it was, because it was one of those things where it's interesting, like I've been drawing all my life and painting, for a long time. And once you start to, like, I enjoy doing, characters. So really, once you start to you get an idea of the forms, then for me, I think that, sculpting is something that only helps that out, right? Like, I think that's why a lot of the old masters did both. They would all, draw and sculpt. And it's like one helps make the other discipline better. So that's why I think it was a pretty easy transition for me.
Awesome. We had here a friend, Brian Thompson, asking that he is I assume a 2D artist, and they're asking about would it be a smooth transition when you are primarily a 2D artist to go in through 3D? What's something that you would recommend for somebody who's only worked in 2D to smoothly start transitioning?
So I think that that's part of the reason why I was drawn to Zbrush, is because I'm really not a proper box modeling 3D guy. And I say this all the time. I have messed around with applications like Maya and things like that, but I'm not really good at thinking that way. So the reason that I enjoy sculpting in Zbrush is because it's a lot like using clay in real life. Like you and I were talking before we started here about, using traditional clay. And it's a lot like that, you know what I mean? And I'm just kind of sketching the forms out and building up and taking away, and rotating around and things like that. So it's a lot like just drawing it, only you can kind of move in the 3 dimensions and build up your forms. So I think it makes it a lot easier to work that way, especially if you come from a 2D background.
Yeah. Well, that's a good transition because it's great to explain it, but it's even better to see it. So why don't you start showing us how some of these, how you start, how you would start one of these pieces?
Absolutely. So it's funny, of course, because Murphy's Law, my ZBrush now is not it's not open. I'm gonna have to restart it. I had everything loaded up the way I want it.
Oh, it
So
always
sorry about that.
happens. No
Yeah.
worries.
Let's see. Give me a second here. Let's say yes. Yeah, apologize for that.
No worries. In the meantime, if the chat can let us know, are you guys ZBrush users? And if you are, what's your favorite ZBrush feature?
If anybody's wondering, the thing that you're seeing on my screen right now is that tutorial that we mentioned earlier that I kind of show. Let's open this up here.
Our friends here are saying ZBrush is life. Honestly, just being able to sculpt is my favorite feature. Feels like no other. Maybe I have to try it finally, guys. I have to just jump from clay to ZBrush. I was telling Mike earlier how I'm just still stuck in the clay world, but hopefully this webinar will inspire me. Finally.
Absolutely. All right. So the way I normally work is I will start with, let's come over here. I'll start with one of the base meshes that comes with ZBrush. So, like, let's say, let's, no, open this up. So I'll take one of these guys and I'll start to sculpt in the muscles, right? It kind of depending upon how bulky I want this person to be. I'll turn on symmetry. I always like to have a lot of reference near me. So, I built a reference board and then I can quickly kind of just grab my, grab my brush and start to build up the forms. And you can see it's very, you're just sketching in these things and then building up the forms and kind of taking them away. So I'll do something like that until I come up with.
What tool do you use? Where are you holding those references? Is that on Zbrush?
No, this is a program called PureRef, P-U-R-R-E-F. And yeah, and you can download that. They take donations, but it's actually a free application. So just drag and drop your images in there and save them. So I have boards for everything, so that's pretty cool. I use that all the time.
Perfect. That's a great little tip. Do you have your own like reference, like Pinterest, or is this something that you build for each project, or you just have your own library that you reference back all the time?
I have a Pinterest board that I've been collecting a ton of stuff. And it's just at Mike T Artworks, like my website. And if you go there, I have a ton of boards for everything, like hard surface stuff, organic, people, clothing, it's all on there. So I usually go there, pull images. I'll go to Google and grab more images and then, build a board that's pretty big. Like this is actually not even one of my larger boards. I have some that are huge, but yeah.
And the same process of starting out would be, say, for things with hard surfaces like costumes and accessories. It's the same process as sculpting skin, say?
Kind of. So when I was saying hard surface, I meant stuff more like robots.
Okay, gotcha.
And with that stuff, there's some really great artists. They go by the name Kios Masons, and they do robots. So what they'll do is they'll take a guy like this, right, and then smooth him out and just go in and start to just quickly cut in shapes. So let's see, let me divide this a couple times. Okay, all right, so this is the one that I actually worked on the anatomy for a while. But if I go back to this one, I'll delete higher and then divide them a couple times, right? So they'll take this guy and start to cut in some of the, the hard surfacey kind of lines of where things will be, right? And then they will, using that clay tube brush, which is what I use, they'll kind of build up these forms and use something like the H polish and kind of flatten them down until they get the, like, imagine we're working on Iron Man or something. So they'll get those forms in and then split off these pieces. So if you go to something like the Select lasso, you can, hold on, let me turn off the smooth here. You can just kind of isolate some of these parts.
Right.
And then go in and, let's say I want to group this. So now if I were to make this, let's see. So, sorry.
No, it's okay.
Yeah. So like if I wanted to make this a poly group, now it's separated from the other piece and I can go in and really start to refine these edges, make them look more kind of robot-y, for lack of a better term, hard surface.
Gotcha.
And then bring it back. And I can do the same thing for the other things until you have something that ends up looking like a piece of armor rather than, an organic form. Yeah. So you can work on things that way. If you're working on stuff like jewelry, kind of the same process. I would probably use the Z modeler in here, which is something that allows you to do a little more box modeling, but inside of ZBrush, where you can take something like a sphere or a cube and add, edges to that and make things that look more like hard surface as well.
Thank you, Mike.
No worries.
Bradley is asking us in the chat or in the Q&A, what about Marvel do you love so much that drives you to create their characters over and over?
I've just been a fan since I was a kid. I always loved the comics. One of the stories I told when I was with you guys, geez, was it 2 years ago or 3 years? 3 years ago, I think.
Yeah, it was 2 years ago.
2 years ago. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
At Wacom Academy.
Yeah, exactly. So, when I was younger and I got good grades in school, my dad would bring me home comic books. And so I would read those and really, just enjoy the characters and the fact that they had these powers and everything. And so that was something that I thought I'd kind of grow out of it. Not so much, I never did. So that's kind of why that's why I like Marvel.
So a little bit of nostalgia.
Exactly. So what I'm going to show you here for the thing that I'm working on today, the Cyclops, it started off as the guy without the detail, right? And then I added the muscles and everything. And then I kind of chopped him up. I wanted a really dynamic pose. So I kind of took his legs and separated those and everything. And I ended up doing a pose, which was not great, right? But this is how it started, because I wanted him to be firing his laser out of his eyes and have him leaping over something. So this is kind of where it started. Okay. And I was like, okay, well, I don't like this. He kind of looks like a ballerina now, which is not the look I was going for. So then I kind of refined the pose a little more and had him looking kind of like this and just keep refining. And then when I found the pose that I liked, I started working on his anatomy. And when I did that, I eventually got to, this stage right here. And this is just a lot of going in and working on the muscles and looking at these images. Like I lean really heavily into this reference, and I think my anatomy, since I started really looking at these images and kind of putting that in my sculpts, has just started to get much, much better. So that's where I am now, right? And you can see that I have his straps and everything on there, but they're really soft. His fingers are real kind of soft still. I don't have the detail that I would normally end up with. But when this is done, let me load up that Venom that I'm working on. I have all these projects that are kind of almost done. And anybody that follows me on, the Pixelogic streams or on Friday nights or anything like that knows that it's easy to get sidetracked.
Is that something that you do on purpose to sort of let you breathe some new ideas into your mind before you continue? Or do you just forget about it because you're ADHD like me?
It's a little bit of A and B, right? Like both of those. So I definitely get sidetracked. And then when I do, it's hard to get back to these guys. In fact, the only reason that I really also might say my naming conventions are terrible. I don't even know where I saved this thing. Also, my let's just skip this and go right to the work. I get a job, right? And I get sidetracked and then I don't get back to the thing that I was working on. So it's not great.
Well,
I
I've always heard it's not good to rush anything, Mike. So maybe it's good that you're sidetracked.
Yeah, okay. You're very kind. It's not good. It's not good at all.
I'm trying.
I started a weekly stream with my friends Danny and Bradley, and the whole idea behind it was we do all these pieces for clients, and where we have no problem meeting deadlines, right? Because if you miss a deadline, you're going to lose the job, and more than likely people will spread the word and you'll lose clients, right? So we get that stuff done with no problems, but when it comes to our own stuff, we never really finish it. So the whole point of this, the whole point of us doing this kind of a stream on Friday nights is we only have a finite amount of time, usually 3 or 4 weeks to finish something, and then we move on to the next project. So it's good at being disciplined and getting things done.
Our friend Aman is asking on the Q&A, a lot of 2D artists mainly use Macs. In Zbrush in 3D sculpting, is it better on PC or can we stay in a Mac, Mike?
So I started on a Mac. I actually used a Mac for most of my career. And then I just switched to PC maybe 5-6 years ago. You totally can use them on either, right? Like Zbrush works fine on a Mac, same way it does on a PC.
And same thing with your Cintiq, friends. It will not care if you're working with a Mac or a PC.
Absolutely.
Do you always use base mesh or start from scratch too? Miguel del Rio is asking.
So I usually use a base mesh because I have an idea in my head that I need to get out as soon as possible. I did work on a project for this class that I'm teaching, where I used Z-spheres, and I ended up having a really good time. So I did this character. Let's see if I can find it real quick. I did a character that this guy that I needed to make something quick, and I needed to teach the students how to use ZBrush. So I started with these a Z-sphere and kind of added Z-spheres and pulled out the forms, and then sculpted on top of it. It gave me a really nice base mesh. And then I kind of sculpted on top of it to get something that looks like what's here on the right. And then I used that to make some, I poly painted it and used it as reference to do a paint over. And this is kind of where I landed. So most of the time when I'm working for a client, unless it's, like a sideshow or somebody, this is the end goal, is coming up with a piece that is completely painted. I'll usually use Corel Painter. I'll use Photoshop as well. And I don't want it to look like it's 3D. Like, that's the main point. I don't want it to look like something that's just a paint over. So that's why I really enjoy this workflow, because I can quickly get something in ZBrush and then get it to look exactly like how I want when I paint it.
That looked really cool, Mike, that piece that you showed us earlier. Super
thank you.
awesome. So we have a job question from Brian Thompson. Speaking of jobs, do you find that it's easier to make a living doing more 3D projects over 2D? More work?
So not really, only because people are normally coming to me for 2D. I only started really sculpting, I don't know, like 6 years ago. So most of the time when somebody is reaching out to me, it's to do something for a movie poster or toy packaging or something like that. But that's, I don't know how that's going to be in another 5 years, after I do enough work. I think when the pieces that I did for Sideshow are released, I'll probably, have an easier time getting some more 3D work.
Thank you, Mike.
Mm-hmm.
What do you recommend to make presentation renderings in ZBrush?
I use Keyshot. I also have Marmoset tool bag for, when I want to do turntables and things like that. And but I'll be honest with you, I have a friend who works for Netflix Animation, and he uses blenders like Eevee render and cycles and everything, and it looks amazing when he's done with these things. So he'll either use that or he'll use Arnold inside of Maya and get these renders that just look, screen ready. So ideally that's what I'd like, but I don't really have the patience to learn that stuff. I will one of these days. I'm kind of like you with ZBrush, but for now I just use Keyshot because it's fast.
Right on. Thank you, Mike.
Hmm?
Let's see. Jorge Novella, it's not a question as much as a request. Could you make a quick demo of making a superhero mesh with panel ops?
With panel loops. So I'm not the best at panel loops. I don't really use those that much. I did do some panel loops for this guy. And I'm telling you, if I stop to do it now, I'd probably spend a lot of time on it. But if you want to go back and go to my YouTube, I have a video of the early version of him where I recorded the whole process, and you can see that there. But like I
Awesome.
said, the only reason I used panel loops was my friend Daniel Bell, who's like my favorite sculptor. That's his workflow, and he's really good at that.
I'm going to ask my colleague Patricio, who's here, to go to our YouTube and go look for that video that you just mentioned. And also we have a Daniel Bell webinar as well. Please, Patricio, if you can go share it with the chat. It's a really nice webinar. Also part of Wacom Academy with Daniel Bell. And let's see, Mike, we have a question. For folks like myself who have been in and out of multimedia for years, what are some general pointers you can share about establishing or rebuilding your electronic portfolio?
So, I mean, just stuff that you probably have heard, from teachers and things like that. Just, you only want to show the kind of work that you want to do. So if you have like a generalist type of a portfolio where you have environments and characters and weapons and whatever, and you really only like to do one of those things, I wouldn't suggest that you show those other things, because there's a very good chance you'll get hired and you can get burnt out really quickly. The other thing too, obviously, you want to show your best work. You don't want to just, volume is never a good substitute for putting your best foot forward with a client. So a lot of times they're overwhelmed. They don't have a whole lot of time to go over new prospective artist work. And if they start off and you have some okay pieces in the front, they'll probably look at those and put the portfolio right down and move on to the next artist. So that's, if that answers, that's kind of what I'd like to keep as advice for artists that ask that question.
Yeah, I've also heard some people say that it's good to have multiple portfolios as well, just because there's going to be different needs in different projects.
Yeah, I tend to kind of gravitate towards, there's a lot of people that are vying for jobs now, right? Especially now. So it's one of those things where if you're okay at something, I wouldn't really go for that particular job. I'd go for the thing that I'm awesome at, because you're going to make a much better impression on a client. And then, even in a pretty good scenario, say you get the job and now you're working on environmental kind of comps all day long, but you hate doing environments like me, you're going to get burnt out. You're not going to like it. At some point, you'll probably decide that, you don't want to work there. So.
Yeah, that's a good point. So let's see. Miguel del Rio, another question. To pose, do you use Transpose Master or another system?
Yeah, I do. I use Transpose Master. I have friends who like to rig their work. One of my friends is actually an animator and a rigger, and he uses Maya and does amazing stuff. I started using Transpose Master. It's a funny story, actually, because he and I have been friends for a while, and I ended up having one of my best poses ever because he told me that you couldn't do it in Transpose Master. He's like, yeah, you can get okay poses, but you're not going to get anything that's like super dynamic. And I was like, challenge accepted, so it was pretty much a spite sculpt. And once he saw that, he left me alone. So that's kind of how I work now.
That's amazing. So James Staples is asking what size of display, Wacom display do you use?
Yeah, I'm on the 32 Pro.
You, for your 3D sculpting, do you find that the size, the bigger, is it just easier for you, or you just always prefer, um, could you be able to do the same thing on a tablet, say an Intuos Pro?
I can, and I actually, when I kind of am out and about, I have smaller tablets that I use with my laptop. But I do find that for me now, I've been spoiled by this. You know what I mean? Like I never thought that I would use a tablet, not a tablet, a screen this large until I started using it. You know, I used to always be the 6x9 guy. Like when I was starting off as an artist, I always bought, when you guys came out with a new 6x9, that's the one I got. And then I got a 22, and then I ended up getting a 27, and then when I got to 32, I was just like, you know what, I think this is this is a sweet spot right here. So
Yeah. I also personally know several really, really amazing 3D sculptors on top of their game who prefer tablets simply because that's how they learned. And
Mhm.
also, they find that it allows them to go deeper into detail by not having their hand on the way. I know people who make jewelry. I know our friend Dan Catcher himself loves the Intuos Pro, although he also has Cintiqs.
Right.
But he prefers tablets for certain things in his work, especially detail.
Hmm. Yeah. For me, it was kind of a health choice to get my first Cintiq because I was doing that's when I first started doing box art for figures, and I had a lot of them to do. And I was working on my Intuos, um, and you know, I had kind of the same position where my hand was down. I'm looking at the screen, and I wasn't taking breaks. And I realized that I started to get like a problem with my wrist, like it really started to hurt. And that made me pull the trigger on my first Cintiq with a stand, right? Like I got a swivel kind of an arm stand at the time, like a ergonom or ergotron or something. And it went away. Like it actually helped me out. So I had pushback at the time for, you know, for buying it. I think my spouse at the time thought it was a want, not a need. But you know, I quickly stopped having hand problems. So I'm happy I did it.
Perfect. Yeah. If you guys are doing this for many hours at a time, sometimes a bigger display is better for your posture, especially if you get a stand or an ergo.
Yeah, and take breaks. Take breaks. It's easy to lose track of time. I'll look up and it'll be dark outside, and that's not good. But you know, it's just one of those things that go get
Mike,
some coffee or something.
going back to what you were saying, about anatomy, the are you just self-teaching yourself anatomy? Do you take a class? Are there some books that you reference, or it is something that you're just doing trial and error? I know that takes a lot of years to master, but how are you managing to make sure you're getting your anatomy basics down?
Sure. So it's kind of all of the above. You know, I have these statues that I use that are great. I have tons of books, you know, anatomy for sculptors and you know, strength training anatomy, all these things that I talk about all the time on my Pixelogic streams. But you know, I'm constantly just looking at reference. Like I said, I always have this board, you know, or a board like it open. I have one that, you know, here you go, hands, which I'm kind of looking at these hands, and I use that because I wanted his other hand to feel very much, you know, like it has tension, almost like arthritic, you know. So I was looking at these, and this is what I'll reference when I start to sculpt those, you know. Um, so yeah, that's it. reference
Perfect.
all the time.
So you mentioned that you don't like sculpting or designing backgrounds, but scenery sometimes is important to your sculpts. How do you go about choosing scenery to incorporate them into your sculpts? Another question by James Staples.
Well, so that's the thing, right? If anybody looks at my sculptures, they'll notice quickly that I have a lot of characters and not so many bases, right? Because that's the thing where I really need the most improvement. So I'm fortunate that I have friends that are concept artists that they can give me something like I have a friend named Elliot, guy goes by Jerkmonger on Instagram, amazing penciler and inker. And so I reached out to him and was like, hey man, I'm working on this Cyclops. Can you maybe help me figure out this base? Because like right now, what I have for this is it's okay. You know what I mean? Like it's kind of whatever. It's pretty boring actually. But I wanted to have something with the school where I have the X and have like the school for gifted teenagers. And this is going to be like an explosion that's underneath of it. And these, these eye bars that are falling down or something. And then, so the whole look of this was supposed to be, he's using his laser blast, his optic blast and shooting at some stuff. Maybe he's in the danger room or something like that. Right. So it's okay. It doesn't suck, but it's not great, And I think one of the things that I'm realizing when I get briefs from somebody like Sideshow is that they always have that concept art buttoned down. So all I have to do is just sculpt what's on the paper. And so I either have to get better at doing the bases and, kind of what you're calling the environments and or have somebody kind of help me out, You don't have to be great at everything. I guess is my point. My
That's a
long-winded
great point.
point.
Yeah, you should stick to what you do best.
Yeah.
Remember that Mike has offered 50% off coupon for his anti-venom sculpting tutorial. I am dropping the information in the chat right now. If you guys don't have it, please save it and go take advantage of it. He's been very generous, 50% off. Or you can check out his Pixelogic streams as well. When do you do these streams, Mike?
I have one. I have one this Thursday. On East Coast time, it's 1 to 4. So West, I guess, is I don't know. I'm not a great mathematician. Whatever that translates to 3 hours behind. That's what I do. But yeah, so one is on Thursday, and then I'll be doing one 2 weeks after that on the following Thursday.
Pretty sure if you go follow Pixelogic on Facebook or Instagram, they'll be sharing the times.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I've already done like, I don't know, 35, maybe 40 of them at 3 hours each. It's a lot of content, but that's all on my YouTube.
Go follow Mike on YouTube. I just shared his Instagram. I'll drop his YouTube channel in the chat in a second. In the meantime, I have another question from one of our guests. How do you manage to sculpt symmetrically in dynamic poses?
So it's not really being sculpted symmetrically. What I'm doing, this is a thing that people they cringe at when they hear that I do this, but I like to break symmetry early, and I don't really use dynamic symmetry, right? Because it always kind of fails on me. I'll do something that makes it so it breaks that link and I can't use it. So what I'm usually doing is just sculpting everything twice. And that kind of sounds like it's ridiculous, but it's allowed me to get much better at anatomy, because I'm constantly trying to make sure that both arms look similar. You know, like I think a really good example of that is, I gotta find this Venom piece. Let's see, Venom. Okay, let's try this.
And just so you know, Daniel Pinto, I think that Mike is explaining your next question, which was the best way to make dynamic poses in Zbrush. So I think Mike is about to show us. So it's like two birds with one stone.
Yeah, essentially. So I don't know if this is the latest version of it, but let's see what happens here. Okay, yeah. So for him, like I broke symmetry really early for him, because for whatever reason, I just find that if I can find the pose, I'm more interested in the sculpt itself. So I need for it to be dynamic. And so that's what I came up with. And then I'll isolate something like the arm and just start sculpting it. Let's get these by themselves. And yeah, so I'll start to sculpt in all of the detail on that. And then once I have this arm kind of figured out, the volumes and everything, I'll do some quick little screen grabs of it. Right, so I can see it from the different angles. And then I switch back to the other arm and do the same thing, right? So I'll take this whole thing and I will now go in and sculpt this to try to make sure that the tricep are the same size, and the forearms and all that stuff looks like it's on the same guy. The hands is probably the hardest part. Doing 10 fingers is kind of a pain, but I always feel a little more like a sense of accomplishment after I have it all figured out, So anyway, that's it.
It may seem longer, but it brings Mike a greater sense of accomplishment.
Absolutely. Yeah. Here's one where I actually had a pretty decent, like a base idea figured out. Let's see if I can turn this on here.
Do you have a preference over Zbrush or Zbrushcore?
Yeah, Zbrush, absolutely. Because Core is basically like a beginner's version. So you're not getting all the tools. There are features that are in Zbrush that aren't in Core. The class that I'm teaching right now, I have students who are using Core, and it's great, right? Like you can do a lot of the things that I'm doing here, but there are certain things that I use every day that are just not in that version,
Right.
Yeah. So like this is how this guy is going to end up printing out. And when he's done, he's going to, like I did this piece. Let me make the screen larger real quick. So that Hulk that you saw on my other screen here, let's see, go over here and go to Hulk, right? So this guy right here, I ended up printing that and on my filament printer, and then made a resin cast of it, and you can see it's huge. So imagine his whole body, it's massive. Like
that's very cool.
This is one of his arms.
Wow.
Which is huge. So anyway.
I love it. Thanks for showing us.
Yeah, no worries. Thank you.
Brandon says, Mike, my presentation skills is very lackluster, almost non-existent. What is something you do that really makes the sculpt pop out at the end?
Lighting can do a lot for your piece. So what I like to do is, like, say I'm going to show this guy. What I'll do is if I'm going to present this to a client, I can, quickly, rather than having to do a full cycles render or key shot, whatever that is, I can just kind of turn on the color, right? I can go over to my lighting, and I like to have really for ZBrush just a 2-point setup. So I'll have the front light, and then I'll have like something that is a rim light that I can turn on like that, and go into my BPR settings. So if I come over to render and go down to BPR shadow, I turn the raise up. It's by default, it's at 12. So I'll turn that up to like 60, right? And the blur is usually set to 2. I'll turn it up to 4. So that's going to make my shadows a little softer on the fall off. And then I turn the G strength down to 0.75, right? And I think it's normally at 0.85. So that means that those shadows aren't going to be really black. They're going to be, kind of nice and like a charcoal gray or something, right? So then when I render it, let me first make sure, let's see, I want to turn off my filters here so you can see, get the full effect. There are these things called Bpr filters, right? So if I turn them all off and I do a render, it looks pretty good, right? It's clean.
Yep.
So what I would normally do is say I'm sending this to a client. I would do a render like this. So let's do this. One of the legacy features of ZBrush, not a whole lot of people are using it right now, but I still like it, is layers, right? Not layers, but the layer at the top here. So you have, there's a layers and there's a layer, right? It's a little confusing, but if you go up next to file on layer, you can do something like bake this layer, right? So now it basically drops it down to the canvas, and then I can draw out another character, right? So if I hit create and make a new layer, now if I pull out my mouse, I have him again. So what I can do here, if I'm gonna, we're talking about presentation, if I want to show this to Sideshow or whatever, right? I can come over here and show some back detail, maybe do something like this. And then I can even change the lights. The lights don't have to be the same. So I can now adjust the light. Let's move this over here. Maybe say we want this rim light now to be down here, like over here, like that, right? What we can do now, I hate having a light dead center. Don't ever put the light in the center of your sphere either. It's just boring. So yeah, I'll move that like that, and I'll do another render here. And then I can go back to layer and I can hit bake, and it shows both of these pieces. So now I can take this, I can export it as a PSD or JPEG or whatever, and then I can show it to the client. So that's how I usually present for quick approvals. Another thing you can do is, I had mentioned the filters before, right? So if I go back to render and I go down to the filters, Bpr filters, I have them set up to do different things. So if I go over to F3, this is for sharpen. So if I click on this, it made my other one disappear. It usually can only deal with like one thing at a time. But let's say, here, let's do this. I'm going to undo these layers. Let's just merge them and clear them. So merge, I will clear them and make a new scene here, right? And now if I, let's do lighting one more time, maybe make it a little more dramatic. I'll do something like that. Okay, do my lighting. I love doing these BPR renders because you can just change your lighting and it changes the mood of the piece entirely. Right, so now I have this. And if I were to go to render and go to those filters, I can turn on things. Like if I turn off the sharpen and then turn it back on again, everything on there becomes a little less soft, right? And then I have other things that I can turn on. So like over here, I have this outline cavity, right? If I turn that on, what that's going to do is wherever there's a, like a crevice in the thing, it will punch up that. So it's a little more, detailed. So I have a whole bunch of filters that I'll turn on, and I save them because I could never remember them, right? So if I go over to load and I hit this, like now my background has this nice cloudy kind of dramatic background. My guy is real punchy and he's lit just perfectly. And I didn't do anything other than hit render on here. I didn't have to do any post-processing in Photoshop, nothing. So the great part about this is I can do all of this work right in ZBrush. Then I can export it out as the image, quickly email it to the client, get an approval or get notes, and then keep it moving. Save a lot of time. So that's normally how I present. And if I'm not, like if I have more time or the luxury of spending time on a render that like say I want to have something that's a really nice clay render, I'll go into Keyshot and end up doing one of these and, get like some really nice solid details in there, like skin pores and all that.
That's wonderful. Thank you for showing us. That's
No
really
worries.
useful. Well, guys, we've been sculpting with Mike for 1 hour. Remember, this is part 1 of a 2-part demo series. So you can join us next week where we will be with Mike again, where he's going to show us a little bit more about his process. If you have any last minute questions, this is a chance to send them. I'll be wrapping up the webinar soon. I'm going to be reading a few last minute questions here. There's one from James Staples. How do you deal with or keep artist block from stopping you if it ever does? James.
Yeah, no, that's a real problem. So for me, what I end up doing is I'll take a break and go to something else. I think the fact that like, especially during the past year or two, really since COVID, I've been juggling a whole lot of different projects. And so I have personal things that I'm achieving, and in addition to doing client work, and as a freelancer, sometimes it gets slow with client stuff. So, if I get an artist block and I just don't know what to do, I'll put the piece aside and either, go work on something else, or I'll hop onto ArtStation. That's a really good way to jumpstart your creative juices, right? Look at what other people are doing. And I usually see a whole bunch of really dope stuff that's done by people who are like a third of my age. So I get depressed, and then I'll leave ArtStation and go watch cartoons and eat cereal. I'm sharing too much? No, that's
No.
so I'll cry a little bit into my cereal bowl. But no, build up reference, do house cleaning, whatever, just anything that's going to get your eyes off of the piece, and take a break. You come back and you approach it with fresh eyes, and 9 times out of 10, that will be what you need. Something else that's really helpful is talking to friends. I have a lot of friends who are also sculptors or, painters or whatever. Very fortunate that I've been doing this a long time, so I can talk to, guys like Eric Sosa or Daniel Bell or, like Jason Seiler, like really amazing guys at the top of their craft. And I can say, hey, what do you think of this? And don't be nice. And, they'll tell me, oh, well, maybe change this thing or this, that looks great, but maybe change this. And, you can do that on Facebook too. Sometimes people aren't as nice on the internet, but sometimes that tough love is what you need. That's how I got better at anatomy. Is I would show stuff on the Pixelogic forums, and on the Pixelogic pages on Zbrush on Facebook, and get torn down over really suspect anatomy. And rather than deciding I wanted to give up, I would go work harder. So, that's what I would do.
If you're ever bored or need some inspiration, we also have an amazing playlist full of free webinars, just like this one that we're recording right now. I just dropped the webinar playlist in our chat. It can also help you during some creative block. Go check out another software. If you're a sculptor, maybe learn a little bit about drawing. Check it out. And now, Mike, I'm going to ask my last question for the webinar.
Okay.
Let's see. Well, we know that you're a big fan and friend and influencer for Zbrush. So I'm going to put you on the spot right here because we do have some students here or people considering it, but they're doubting. Let's see.
Okay.
Is Zbrushcore a good, inexpensive option for someone just breaking into the 3D modeling? I know you mentioned that you have some students who are a little bit limited by Zbrushcore, but someone who's just breaking into and doesn't want a super expensive option because they may not stick with it.
Yeah.
Is Zbrushcore okay, or is there something else you recommend for somebody still iffy?
Well, absolutely, it's a good option. And in fact, like I said, this course that I developed for CG Spectrum, I had to do the ZBrush side of it, right? So like 6 weeks of it are ZBrush, the other and like you create characters and stuff, and then you paint over them using Photoshop. And so that's what I suggested for the students, because I didn't want them to go out and spend the money for a full version of ZBrush. Or, you do always have the subscription model as well, right? Which is cheaper. But for what they needed to do, Core was fine, And I have an example. I have a student of mine who she loved it, and she jumped in with both feet, and she liked it so much that she decided to get the full version of it. And so it's a great way to figure out where you are and whether it's something that you want to continue to play around with, and if it's not, I would say try the subscription first, or either one, Core or the full version, and then you can make the decision after that what you want to do. But it's a great piece of software.
It really is. And it's not that we're friends or that they're the only one, but they are the best. So we're letting you guys know, Zbrush, if you can get your hands in it, great. Zbrushcore, amazing for you to get started. Go check out Mike's streams with our friends at Pixelogic so you can learn more about it. And I know I said that was my last question, but this one seems like a quickie. And okay. Mike Culver just asked, does Zbrush allow you to do engineering for 3D printing? Example, the part breakup for assembly.
Yeah, totally. So I do all my cutting and keying in ZBrush. I can open up something really quickly. Let's see. So this piece that I'm working on here, this guy was all cut and keyed in ZBrush, and it is tools. Okay. So if we look at this, the way that I did this is with the full version of ZBrush, they have something called Boolean functions. And what I'm able to do is let's turn on everything real quick. Okay, and then if I turn on transparency, actually, let's turn on the color. Let's see. Oh, it is on. All right, yeah. So if I turn on the transparency, you can see that I made a key for the upper body. And then I back that out of the lower body, and the same thing for the arms and the head. So all of that stuff fits together really nicely. And that was done directly in ZBrush. So like if we look at this guy, right, this is the original head. On the bottom there's the key. And it all just fits together so that when you look at the piece, it's seamless, right? Like it takes some practice to get it to be really, super clean. But yes, the long answer to what you just asked is, can you do it in ZBrush? Absolutely.
Perfect. Thank you so much for sharing that. And thank you, everyone who joined us for this first session. Remember, we're going to be back with Mike next week. I appreciate you all being great students, great audience, asking all your questions. Please don't forget to go visit our friends at Wacom Canada and give them a follow. They made this webinar possible. They're trying to grow their community. If you know amazing Canadian artists that Wacom should be working with, please let Wacom Canada know, tag us, put them in our radar. Thank you, Mike, so much for spending this time with us and sharing so much of your experience with us. I look forward to our chat next week. Let's see what you prepare, what you show us. Prepare your questions for us too, guys. Mike is an encyclopedia of knowledge, and Zbrush has so much to offer. So I can't wait to see you guys next week. Thank you so much. And thank you, team. This webinar is a wrap.
All right. Thanks, guys. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Mike.